Most boys grow up wanting to make their fathers proud, to follow in their footsteps, carry the family name, and continue the legacy. But in 1926, in a small town in Cuba, a boy was born who did the exact opposite. That boy was Fidel Castro, a man who would shake the world, defy empires, and leave behind one of the most controversial legacies in modern history. Fidel Castro was not the son of a revolutionary. In fact, his father, a wealthy landowner, was against Cuban independence and had emigrated from Spain, hoping Cuba would stay under Spanish control. Fidel was the child of his father's second wife, once a worker on his farm, which meant Fidel inherited his mother's last name. Despite growing up with the privilege, young Fidel saw the inequalities of the world around him. After World War II, he entered university in Havana, where he studied law. But the classroom wasn't where he found his purpose. It was in politics, protest, and public speaking. While his grades in math and physics were mediocre, his skills on stage, unmatched. It was during this time that communist ideas were spreading like wildfire in universities around the globe, and Fidel began reading the works of Karl Marx and Lenin. He wasn't just reading, he was absorbing. Soon, Fidel became deeply involved in Cuba's leftist movements. In 1953, he and a group of rebels attacked the Moncada barracks, hoping to spark a revolution. It failed. He was arrested and sentenced to 15 years in prison. But that didn't silence him. In court, he delivered a powerful speech titled "History Will Absolve Me," a fiery defense that would later become Cuba's revolutionary manifesto. The speech was so influential that the Cuban government, under pressure, pardoned him just 2 years later. That pardon would become one of the costliest mistakes in Cuban history. Castro was exiled to Mexico, where fate introduced him to a man who would become his closest comrade, Che Guevara. Together they planned their return to Cuba. In 19 they launched their second rebellion, this time better organized and supported by many Cubans fed up with the dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista, who ruled with U.S. backing. By 1915, after intense guerrilla warfare and clever propaganda, Batista fled the country. Castro entered Havana a hero, declaring the revolution victorious. But victory was just the beginning. Fidel Castro quickly consolidated power and declared Cuba a communist nation, aligning himself with the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War. The U.S. was furious. In 1961, the CIA launched the Bay of Pigs invasion, a failed attempt to overthrow Castro. President John F. Kennedy called it a disaster. Then came the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The Soviet Union placed nuclear missiles in Cuba just 90 miles from U.S. shores. In response, the U.S. moved its nukes to Turkey. The world held its breath. For 13 days, the world stood on the edge of nuclear war until a secret deal removed the missiles from both nations. Fidel Castro had become a global figure, loved by some, hated by others. Under Castro, Cuba became a nation of extremes. He provided free education and health care to all. By 2000, Cuba had a 97% literacy rate and one of the best medical systems in Latin America. It was one of the first countries to control HIV and Cuban doctors were sent around the world. But at what cost? The economy suffered under harsh U.S. sanctions and poverty spread. Castro banned free speech, silenced critics, and jailed or exiled dissidents, including his own daughter, who fled to the U.S. and spoke out against him. He also sent LGBTQ+ individuals to forced labor camps, a dark stain on his regime. When the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s, Castro's regime nearly fell with it. In response, he reluctantly allowed private businesses and eased some restrictions, abandoning many of the ideals he once fought for just to keep his regime alive. In 2006, he transferred power to his brother, Raul Castro, due to health issues. By 2010, Fidel Castro passed away at the age of 90, a man who had outlived 11 U.S. presidents and survived an alleged 634 assassination attempts, including one where the CIA planned to hide a bomb in his cigar. He also holds the UN record for the longest speech, 4 hours and 29 minutes. To some, Fidel Castro was a symbol of resistance, a hero who stood against imperialism and gave voice to the poor. To others, he was a dictator who ruled with an iron fist and left his people in poverty. Love him or hate him, one thing is certain: Fidel Castro changed the course of history, and his story is far from forgotten. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into history's most powerful figures.